Hello, Human Geography. This lecture is about population density. So we're going to talk about where people are located around the world and in what concentrations and density. So our key issue here, what we're trying to learn is where is the world's population distributed? So we talked a little bit about it in the video with Power of Place number 18 in Egypt, and kind of looked at some statistics in class today. So where's the world's population distributed? So about 2/3 of the world's population are clustered in 4 regions: East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Europe. These are the biggest clusters or concentrations of people. And as you notice in the Power of Place, humans tend to live in low-lying areas with fertile soil and near an ocean or a river for easy access. When we take a look at this map, this is something that we will absolutely need to know. So these countries, this is a map of countries based on population. So their size and shape is distorted based on the population of the country. Okay, and so you notice again, this area of the world is where most people live. Okay, the countries with 100 million and above are marked by orange, or that reddish orange color. You should absolutely know the list of countries on this map, the top 10 most populated countries in the world. And here's a list of them right there. And this in particular is an economic comparison of the world's most populous nations. So take a look. China and India, first of all, are far, far, far ahead of the United States, which is third in terms of population in millions. China's population is 1.3 billion and India's is 1.3 billion. It's incredible. And at some point, probably around 2020, 2022, India is going to pass China on this list. But you take a look at the rest of the nations, and it's interesting to see, first of all, how developed they are based on their gross national income or their purchasing power parity. What that basically means is they take the national income of the country and divide it up by the country's population, as if everyone would get an equal share. And then they can we convert it into basically international dollars, so US dollars, and say so that if every person in China got a share of the national income in US dollars, it would be this number there, so about 14,160. Okay, so you can see the United States in particular there in the third most populous country in the world, but by far has a greater purchasing power than every other country on the list. The next closest country would then be Russia down here at the bottom. There. Another thing to look at is the Human Development Index, which is what HDI stands for. Human Development Index is we'll look at it in development, but basically it's a rank of how well off people are in that country, like how nice it is to live there. Interesting observation, if you look at this line, the United States is the only top 25 country on the HDI rank. Every other country is below 25, and in fact, Russia is the only top 50 country. So what does that tell us? Most of the people live in countries that are still developing. Okay, and they do not have the same economic purchasing power as other places with much less population or higher developed. But that's the key here, is that most people live in countries that are still developing. So, and this is a map of the world's population density. So again, it shows us where population is distributed, and again, that supports the notion that we just said. People are not distributed uniformly across the earth, right? We have these great population clusters in parts of the world. And basically, we occupy as humans a very, very, very small portion of the Earth's surface. Part of that has also to do that 71% of the Earth's surface is actually water, right? But as far as land goes, we tend to cluster and be near each other and create these very high concentrations and these very dense places of population. So We avoid clustering in certain physical environments, which is one of the reasons why, when we go back to that previous map, why this situation occurs. So we avoid clustering in places that are too dry, too wet, too cold, or too high. So if we go back to this map again, up here in this area here, let me kind of clear this. Oops. Erase that there. Sorry. Okay, so if we look at this area of the world right here, that's a very high elevation of the world. So and there's not a lot of people that live there. Siberia, very cold place on the earth, right? And so there's virtually no population there. So we tend Northern Africa, the Sahara, very dry. We will not cluster there. Okay, so we need to have those certain conditions that we talked about before. Places considered too harsh for occupancy have diminished over time. We have found ways to live in places that otherwise would have been considered a harsh environment. And what we looked at with the Egypt the other day, excuse me, in the video, we looked at Egypt. You notice that Egypt is, right here in the Sahara Desert, otherwise a very, very dry place. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, relatively dry place, but we figured out how to irrigate, how to move water, and how to have a higher concentration of populations in those areas. Okay, but places where we find permanent human settlement are called ecumene. They're places that we live permanently and have lived permanently for a while. Okay, and this map kind of shows how that has changed over time. So, in 5000 BC, this is where people lived. Okay, and here we are at about 1900 today. Now, why has that occurred? Well, if we take a look at this situation here, right? This situation here, this situation here, this situation here, that situation has changed by migration, right? Sea travel has allowed people to move throughout the earth and move from the typical places of ecumene, which is right there. So movement of people, population growth, as we're going to talk about, have changed where we live. So population density. When we look at population density, we talk about it in three ways, and we'll use each one of these. The first way is the arithmetic density. So you take the total number of objects in an area and divide by the land area. So if we had a square, right, and this is 1 square mile, and we had 10 dots in it, right, we would say, we would divide those 10 dots by that 1 square mile and get an arithmetic density. So it's just simply the number of people that live there divided by the area. Okay, and you get a very very high number or a very low number, and that would tell you the density. Very high density, very low density. Okay. Physiological density is the number of people supported by an area of arable land. So we would look at the amount of arable land and the actual people that live on it. So if there's a lot of people living in an area with a very little arable land, we would say that's very high physiological density. Great example of that is Egypt. Egypt has a very high physiological density because there's not a lot of arable land, but there's a lot of people that live in that little area right there. Okay, and I'll show you some more examples of that. And then agricultural density is the ratio of number of farmers to the amount of arable land. So you just simply divide the number of farmers by the arable land area, and you get a number, very high or very low. So if you take a look at some of these maps, this is persons per square kilometer. So it shows us the density. Okay, so very high density is in red. Very low density is in this kind of buff color there. All right. So again, you notice where people tend to live, right? These are densely populated. There are a lot of people per square kilometer there. The United States is the third most populated country in the world. Brazil is a top 10 populated country in the world as well, but we don't have a very high population density per square kilometer in our countries. We have a lot of space and not many people in that space compared to Southeast Asia. This is persons per kilometer of arable land. So this is physiological density. And again, look at Egypt. Very, 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 very high physiological density. They put a lot of people on a very, very small amount of arable land. If you go back to the persons per square kilometer and look at Egypt here, it's not quite as high. Okay. Again, notice this is Colombia over here. Very high person. Not a lot of arable land in Colombia, but there's a lot of people that supports it. Okay. Same thing with Japan. Very high physiological density. And then finally, we have farmers per square kilometer. So this is the agricultural density. Okay. Again, notice. Look at Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, there are a lot of farmers per square kilometer of arable land. Look at the United States. There are not very many farmers per kilometer of arable land. The United States produces way more food every year than Sub-Saharan Africa does. All right, but we do it with way fewer farmers. What does that tell us? It tells us that the United States has a commercial agricultural economy. That we're using machines, or that our land is just simply better for growing food than perhaps Sub-Saharan Africa. Because it shows us that it takes a lot of farmers to produce food here in Africa, and less farmers than the United States. Or simply, it can also tell us that this is the economic activity that is most prominent in this area. There's a lot of farmers in this area because people are still doing that. So either one of those two things, that simply the land is not as productive, not that the land isn't productive, but that people, it takes more manpower to do the same thing because they don't have the technology, or that's just simply this is the most common economic activity in that area. Okay. So that's the end of the slideshow. So going back to the beginning again, thinking about what are we supposed to learn? Where is the world's population distributed? So we think about that. We know most people in the world are living in Asia, right? So we're looking at, if you say, where's the most populated area in the world? It's Asia. We would not want to know that. And in particular, we would think about China and India. Right? We talked about the world's most typical person. They were Chinese, right? Where do we tend to live? We tend to live near water, right? And as we talked about in class, why? Because it's sustainable food. Okay, and there are three different ways of looking at density. It's either simply the number of people in a space, the amount of arable land, and people, or the amount of farmers per space. All right, and each one gives you a little bit of a different look at the country and the number of people there and where they live. Okay, so that's the lecture for today. We will see you in class next time as we continue with our unit on population.